Hi everybody, welcome back to Pets Right Now with Sonic, and today we're reading I Survived the Attacks of September 11, 2001, and last time we got to chapter 5, so let's start off chapter 5. Chapter 5, Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, 8:15 a.m., New York City, New York. Lucas had made this trip so many times with Dad, he knew it by heart. The train to Penn Station, the subway to Canal Street. When he got out of the subway, he looked up and found his landmark, the two silver buildings jutting into the sky, the twin towers of the World Trade Center. The World Trade Center was 9 blocks south of the fire station, so he just followed his view of the towers until he hit the right street. As Lucas walked, he thought of the last time he and Dad visited the Trade Center. I'd gotten there early, before the observation deck was open, but the guard noticed Dad's fun FDNY hat and let them go up. They had to place to themselves. The view from the 10th floor was looking like down of Manhattan from a cloud. The whole island stretched out in front of them. The buildings below looked like toys. The rivers like trickling streams. The cars and trucks looked smaller than the model that Lucas and Dad built in the basement. They stood there, just Dad and Lucas, alone on top of the world. That was right before the warehouse fire, only 2 years before now. It seemed like a very long time ago. When Lucas got to the firehouse, the garage door was open, and there, right next to the sea cave, was Uncle Benny. He glanced up and gave an offhand smile, obviously thinking that Lucas was just a neighborhood kid, hoping to get a peek at the truck. But then Uncle Benny looked at Lucas again. "Hey, you!" he said with a surprised grin, standing over. He pulled Lucas into the garage. Lucas breathed in the familiar smell of diesel fuel and sweat. He'd always loved the sight of all the guys' black bunker coats hanging on the walls, the pants already tucked into the big black boots. The firehouse was crowded. The guys from the last ship were saying their goodbyes, and the morning men were just getting settled. Guys came from all over the hot firehouse to say hi to Lucas, wrapping him in bear hugs, rubbing his head, and telling him he was growing like a weed. I've missed my assistant, said Georgie, who drove the truck and also did most of the cooking. On Lucas's visits to Dad, his favorite job was helping Georgie cook his famous tomato sauce. Chief Dudros came over, his smile flashing from under his bushy gray mustache, followed by Mark, one of the youngest guys. He and his family lived not far from Lucas. His 8-year-old twin boys were football fanatics, and Mark coached their team. Last season, they came to one of Lucas's games. Afterward, the twin had asked Lucas for his autograph. Suddenly, Uncle Benny looked around. "Where's your Pops, he said, he's already done at the rock. Lucas shook his head. Again. Lucas shook his head. Your mom brought you? Uncle Benny said. Lucas shook his head again. Uncle Benny eyed Lucas, and his face and his smile faded. You okay? He said softly. Lucas didn't answer. Uncle Benny looked at Georgie, who gave him a nod. Cover me, will you guys? Uncle Benny asked. I'll be back in a few. Uncle Benny led Lucas outside, and they started walking. This is some kind of day, isn't it? He said, squinting up at the bright blue sky. Neither of them said any more until finally Lucas came out with it. Mom and Dad are making me quit football, he said, because of my concussions. Lucas watched Uncle Benny's face, waiting for his eyebrows to mash together within anger, for his cheeks to burn furious red. But Uncle Benny just nodded. Then he looked at Lucas. I've been worried about you, kiddo, he said. You've got yourself a darn good brain. I don't want you ending up like poor Saint Wash. And then it suddenly hit Lucas. It was Uncle Benny who got Mom to bring him to see Dr. Barrett. He must have known he'd been Saint Walsh's doctor. Lucas had came all this way because he thought Uncle Benny would help him. And Uncle Benny was the reason he had to quit. Uncle Benny stopped and put his hands on Lucas's shoulders. It seemed like he was trying to keep Lucas pinned to the ground. Like otherwise, he'd fly away. He stared at Lucas with those bright, light eyes of his. You'll find something else, he said. What else do I have? Lucas wanted to ask, but before he could, something over Lucas's shoulder caught Uncle Benny's attention. Lucas turned, and then he saw it too. A glint of silver against the bright blue. Out of nowhere, a huge jet airplane zoomed into view. It was flying very low. All right, now we got to chapter 6. All right, now today we're gonna read to probably chapter 7. So yeah, chapter 6, 8:46 a.m. What the? Uncle Benny said. He and Lucas stood and watched as the plane tore through the sky, its engines screaming. Everyone else on the sidewalk stopped and looked up. Lucas had never seen an airplane flying so low, expect taking off or landing. He could see the plane was so clearly, the engines tucked under the wings, the sun glittering off the windows. He could even read the letters on the tail. AA, American Airlines. The engines roared. That plane had to be in trouble. It was going to crash. Questions raced through Lucas's mind. Had the pilot's instructions spoken? Was the pilot confused? Was he sick? Once Lucas heard about a pilot who had a heart attack in the middle of a flight. But that didn't make sense. There would be a cop pilot there to take over. Or maybe airplanes flew like this all the time in New York City, and Lucas just hadn't noticed before? Or no, it had to be a movie. That was it. Some action movie was being filmed over New York City. But where were the cameras? How were they filming the plane? Something was wrong, and everyone knew it. People up and down the sidewalk were stopped in their tracks, horrified by the sight of a jet ripping across the sky. The plane turned slightly, one wing dipping down. The engines roared, turned to a screech. It was moving faster now and going lower and lower. It barely missed the tops of some buildings as it careened through the air. But just ahead, two buildings stood taller than the rest, the Twin Towers. The plane was heading right for one of the towers. Turn! Lucas wanted to scream, pull up! But it didn't turn, and suddenly the plane plugged like a knife into the side of one of the buildings. For a split second, Lucas waited for the plane to reappear on the other side, to keep flying as though nothing had happened. But then, kaboom! A giant fireball, orange and black, exploded out of the side of the building. Lucas jumped back in honor. All around him, people screamed. Black, fiery smoke gushed out of a huge gas in the building's side, blowing into the sky. Lucas turned away. He couldn't look anymore. He looked at Uncle Benny instead. Uncle Benny was already shouting into his phone. Call dispatch. A plane just crashed into the World Trade Center. This is a 1060. Yes, a 1060. A 1060 was the worst kind of alarm. And that's when it hit Lucas. There had to be hundreds of people trapped in that tower. And no matter how dangerous it was, firefighters like Dad and Uncle Benny were going to try to save them. All right, now we're at chapter 7, so now we're done.